Good evening, everybody. Good evening, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is John Bernstein. I am a former deputy editor of the new Statesman magazine. It is a pleasure to be at the Fasley Studios tonight, to be in Digbeth. It's also a pleasure to welcome you to this event, put together in partnership with YouTube, Creativity Unleashed, powering digital growth in the Midlands. We want to talk about growth, we want to talk about opportunity, we want to talk about skills, we want to talk about inclusion, we want to talk about creativity, plus I'm sure a bunch of other things. It is an absolute pleasure to welcome our two fantastic speakers this evening, Patricia Bright and Andy Street. Patricia has a background in financial consulting and very much a foreground as a content creator with a following of over 4 million people. We were wondering if some of the followers might be in the audience tonight. Just by a show of hands, please.
Okay, representing Birmingham, we love it.
Very good, excellent stuff. You are very welcome. Let me tell you a little bit more. You can probably tell me even more than I've got on this piece of paper. Her self-named YouTube channel is one of the largest fashion and beauty channels in the UK. And then in 2020, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Patricia, you followed that up with the launch of the Break platform, the fastest growing YouTube channel on business, personal development, and personal finance aimed at women, with over 400,000 followers and counting. Nodded head there. Pretty good stuff. Maybe some new followers tonight. Andy Street is well known to many of you as the Mayor of the West Midlands, first elected in 2017, elected again in 2021. His career prior to that was at John Lewis, very impressively from graduate trainee to managing director. A hand for both of our panelists, please. Andy, let me start with you if I can. How important are the creative industries to the West Midlands? What role do they play?
So, however I describe it, I won't do full justice to the creative industries. I thought I'd tell you a little story, though,
please,
which illustrates what I think about this. You chose the Fasley Studios for the event tonight. It's a sort of etched in our brains as a place in our creative journey. We thought back in 2018 that we were going to be selected as the place for the Channel 4 second headquarters. We lost. We didn't like it. It was the low point for our film and production sector. This place is where we threw a brilliant party as a wake. And I suspect there's some people in the room here who were here at that party. And I tell that because it was on that day that we said this cannot go on, our relatively eclipsed position in the creative sector. So it's critical from an economic content point of view. Everyone knows the numbers, the fastest growing area of the economy. It connects with lots of other faster growing areas through the whole sort of tech sector. But it's something even more important to me. It's the sort of, it gives what you might call the soundtrack, the official recording of a city region's life. And if you don't have that, you're not represented on the nation's screens, tellies, international things, then you are missing out. And critically, you're not allowing some of the most creative people in your community the opportunities for the future. So we decided on that night that something was to be done about it. And I hope there might be another question where I'm able to tell you what we did. But the answer is it was a sort of switch point where we decided we've got to do better because we're letting people down because this is a critical sector for us.
There might be a what it did question coming up. Before I do that, is there a danger that sometimes we overstate the impact of the creative industries because we can all connect to it, that actually when we look at the numbers, it is not as impressive, or would you argue otherwise?
Well, let's be clear. If you take the scale of something like the professional services here, that employs 300,000 people, creative industries, and it's hard to define it, isn't it? You know, it's about at best a fifth of that if you take even the widest definition of it. So in that pure economic sense, yes, but it's growing far faster. Our professional services sectors are flat, basically. This sector's growing, well, again, depends how you define it. But pre-COVID, it was growing at a compound rate of heading about 15% a year. So you see the numbers there. But it's far more important, as I say, it's what holds a society together, because you define yourself through whether it's art, theatre, music, whatever. And that's why, for this region, we've decided it's an absolute priority.
Very good. I'd like to bring Patricia in a second, but one more question, Andy. You started with the wake. So
Yes.
talk to me about success stories.
I thought we should hear from Patricia rather than me drone on. Most of the people in this room hear me drone on far too often. But yeah, so we decided that night that we had done badly. And I'll give you one stat that just proves how badly. Of BBC production, and it's naughty to call out BBC, only 2% of their production is made in the Midlands, despite the fact there are more licence fee payers from the Midlands than any other area. And if you take Channel 4, the villains of this story, and we had a wonderful, this room is also significant because Ian Katz and I had a wonderful set to in this room when he deigned to come back to Birmingham 3 years later. So their proportion of made in the West Midlands is tiny as well. So, you know, it really was a low point. So what did we say we've got to do? We said, actually, there's no point politicians and civil servants who complain about this trying to take the lead. And we've done this in other areas of the economy as well. We said to the industry, to the sector, you put a structure together. We will give it some seed funding to get it together, but will then guide the success of the sector. We called it Create Central. The CEO of Create Central is, I think, at the back taking photographs, hiding. She deserves a lot of credit, and I won't wallow in it, but if I just look at the things that have happened since that day, we now have a brand new BBC headquarters building coming here, about 250 yards down the road, definitely happening. The Stephen Knight, who was there on that night of the wake, is now opening his Peaky Blinders studio just down the road there. We have literally, and I'm not going to embarrass them to get me set up, we've literally just been today and seen the first tenant in the sort of offices that surround the studio. They're a creative company from Birmingham. Just over the road there, we have what we call our creative content hub, where we brought together lots of our independent film and TV producers. And then the last bit, and probably the thing I am most excited about, because it will propel our brand around the country very quickly, the MasterChef Studios, brand new, made in Birmingham, is literally, the diggers are in the ground creating it. That is an old banana warehouse, and it sort of tells the story of Birmingham's history. The banana warehouse on the side of the canal turned into the special studio that will be the scene of MasterChef. All of that is new news in the last 2 or 3 years.
Andy,
so we've made progress.
Andy, thank you very much indeed. Yeah, I could hear a ripple of applause there.
No, not much.
I was ready to.
Patricia, high time we turn to you. When did it occur to you? When did you realise that creating content was more than just a side hustle?
I think when I could see the traction and the commerciality of it coming more and more. I think when I first started out in the creator economy, it wasn't considered a real job. And I had a real job. I was definitely in the city. I was definitely commuting and living, I say, in the world of black, white and grey. But there was this thing I was doing on the side by producing content on YouTube, and I wasn't necessarily commercializing anything, but eventually I started to see requests coming in.
And put a timeline on it. Give me a sense of how long it took to get to that stage.
In all honesty, and I think anyone who's thinking about the world now, it's completely different, but I was creating online probably for 3.5 years without making a penny. So this is where I was doing the whole, this is my hobby. This is something that I like doing. I love creativity. And I think because it was such an early industry, brands and companies weren't sure about the commercial aspect, but brands who were really interested in accessing like new media, new audiences, they started to see about the 3-year mark, and they didn't know what they were doing at the time. They were like throwing, gifts here and a few pennies here and there. And people like me were like, yeah, this is great. I'll take on money and stuff to do things that I enjoy. But I think by the year 5 of doing it, it became a big business for me.
So that tipping point was as much the commercial side of things catching up with what you were doing rather than you doing anything particularly different. Is that fair to say?
Exactly that. Yeah. I didn't have a commercial approach.
Yeah.
Again, it was a new industry. So it wasn't as mature as it is now, particularly YouTube. So there was this point, because I still had to manage, working my 9 to 5 alongside being creative, on the side. So once I realized, okay, I actually did an Excel spreadsheet where I did some numbers. I was like, potentially this could be a thing. I don't know how long this industry is going to last. I don't know if I can make a living for an extended amount of time. but I might try it for the next 2 years. And so 7 years on, I'm still here because the industry itself has grown exponentially alongside the opportunities that have happened.
And you've kind of touched on it already, but what made you start? What was the motivation that made you think, I can do this and I want to do this?
Honestly, it was just interest. I was really interested in talking to other people online. So what the weirdos would do and would talk to, like, you know, Reddits and different communities of just connecting with people. And then we just started sharing videos with each other. So again, looking at the world of creativity, it wasn't something that was just about business. It was about following something that was interesting, that was creative. And then eventually it turned into what it was today.
How is your local community, a South London background, how's that influenced the content that you produce?
So I wouldn't say South London specifically inspires the content that I do. However, the fact that we are talking to a global world, people didn't know or hadn't seen someone who looked like me from where I'm from. So no matter what, I represent South London, my vibe, my accent, the way I act, like I've got a certain energy. And what's amazing is that I can present that to someone in Singapore, and I can present that to someone in America, and I can really represent where I'm from and create content. And it's interesting to see how people on a global scale kind of connect with that. And I always represent, and I always say, like, I'm from South London,
so and
I love it.
We have this sort of paradox here, Andy. We got this sort of, you know, it's about regional, you know, we have a regional content creator who has found an audience beyond that region. Is that something that you want to tap into? Is that something that you recognize?
Yes. So I think what's interesting, listening to where both of us have started, they could seem very different, because I've talked about some of the big institutions like the BBC, and Patricia's talked about something which is very ground up. But our view is we needed some of those big institutions to sort of kickstart us. But the whole idea is it then energizes a community and releases it. And that's the whole notion of our plan, that it will have its own energy. And I can see that happening. If I look,
and it will have a feel of the West Midlands and a taste of the West Midlands, and it will feel
absolutely
local.
And it's very important to us. I mean, we're not going to have a debate about London versus Birmingham here, but, you know, energy, youth, diversity, I think those things that we own, actually, not London, but never mind. People can have a row in the room about that. But absolutely, we want to be able to propel that around the world. For a place that is on the cutting edge of what Britain will become, this city, we need more people telling our story. I mean, that's what, for us, the Commonwealth Games was all about. We told a very, I think, authentic story, very moderate, quite self-deprecating story, but we did it with incredible confidence, and people understood what was about brand Birmingham. That's why it was so successful on so many dimensions. But we want that energy, not just the big institutions.
And what role does the private sector play in doing this? Where's the relationship?
Nearly all of it.
Nearly all of it.
Nearly all of it.
So what is your facilitating?
Yes. So this is, I mean, I would say exactly the same if we were talking about car manufacturing as well. But it is not possible for the state, the public sector, to decree this. You do facilitate it in all sorts of ways. I suspect you're going to ask me about talent and skills development and all of that, how we use some of our money on that. That definitely is there. How we actually construct some of this area, the public money that's going into improving this. But actually, it will be the private companies, whether frankly they be as big as Stephen Knight's own company, because he's become, you know, a big businessman as well as a wonderful director as well. But actually, it's the small startups, the SMEs, that will really determine this industry. And that's why it can grow so very fast, because of its private sector mix.
Very good. Patricia, I have to ask you this. Ever thought of taking the business beyond where you're based in London and bringing it to, dare I say it, to Birmingham? Not putting you on the spot or anything.
So actually, hiring remotely is something I do, and that's the world of digital content. We can hire people from wherever we want to. There is talent in so many different places. They are not just in London. They are not just in the UK. So definitely having access to talent from the best universities or the best skills, and not even that, just people who've had the training and are interested, is really important for someone like myself who's just looking for people who are interested in doing something.
Because this is really interesting. I called it a paradox, this sort of this regional but virtual world that we live in. piece of paper that was on your chairs this morning. I was just looking at one of the stats on there from YouTube. 85% of what is watched on by UK produced channels. So 85% of what's watched on UK produced channels, those people watching, 85% of them come from outside the UK. If I've read that statistic right, that is what it is, which is a remarkable figure. So you're producing, to go back to what you were saying earlier, you were producing something with a very definite regional flavour, but it had an audience elsewhere.
Exactly. And that's what the digital world does. Like, we have access to the entire world, and our job is to kind of represent where we're from, but the world is watching.
And you employ people, right?
I do employ people.
How many
correct.
people do you employ?
I have 5 employees right now.
And was that your intention? Did that just become something you had to do?
This is a thing. And I think you mentioned small, like, to medium businesses. There was no plan. There was no goal. There was no strategy. And I've had to kind of build and become a small business owner without realizing what that actually looked like. But when I realized that, you know, I had opportunities and I needed more help, I had to change my mindset into being not just a digital creator, but also a business owner. And that meant bringing on young talent as well, and actually just talent from across the board to support me to be able to do more and more.
And we're going to talk about digital skills in a moment, but those skills required to run a small business, you made it up as you went along. You had those in your back pocket. What happened?
Honestly, it was a lesson of like trial and error. I've made a lot of mistakes, as anyone who's ever created something could definitely do. But I obviously did a little bit of training to find out what kind of resources I would need. I would hire people in, they'd do an amazing job. I would, get someone else in, and maybe they wouldn't do such an amazing job, but I would learn along the way what kind of skills I needed. But I also would reach out to other business owners and find out what kind of resources do you have? What does your team look like, to see if I could model what they were doing to help me build my small company.
Very good. Let's talk about digital skills. Andy, what's the combined authority done to ensure that people of all ages have access to digital skills training?
Spend far too much money. So, you asked me earlier on, what can the public sector do? And there are some enablers of an industry. And this is, I think, actually probably the most important of all. There's a whole piece about regulation, of course, which we might come on to if we want to go to a slightly controversial bit. There's a whole piece about planning, of course. There's all sorts of bits where the public sector contributes. But this, I think, is really, really important. So what we identified a number of years ago we have fairly sizable skills budget now, about 165 million a year. So we can make some choices within that. And what we identified was that digital was mission critical to most of the sectors that mattered to the West Midlands economy. Just to explain, because probably just be interested, we have 8 sectors in what we call our plan for growth. They're the ones we concentrate on. They're the ones we're going to be brilliant at because we've got a competitive advantage and against other places. And I don't just mean against London or Manchester, but I mean against Berlin and Barcelona. And creative is one of those 8. So we have put our money where our mouth is. But all of those 8 are being transferred by digital. So whether it's fintech in professional services, whether it's how logistics is, which of course is really important in the Midlands, how that's becoming an IT business, how medical is becoming a tech business, all those things are changed by digital. So we said, we've got to accelerate this. Now, of course, you've got, your cleverest computer scientists coming out of Birmingham University, but to make it more democratic, we said we will put our money, we started off with we're up to about £15 million a year now. So the constant evolution of this, of what we call our digital boot camps. The very first one was here in Digbeth, and it's now been adopted as national government policy. And the idea is for people who are probably, and I shouldn't characterize it, but I will, in a job that hasn't got the same opportunities as a digital job, they would come for retraining. It's short, sharp, very intensive, about 20 people cohort for about a term in old-fashioned language. And the success rate of people getting into much better jobs is very, very high. So we actually think we've set a standard, and it actually has driven the success of our digital businesses. And the digital sector here, if you can call it a sector, is now our fastest growing area. And we're now, ladies and gentlemen, hot news, the second biggest digital sector after London in the UK. And this is a race we have to win, because it will determine where the real successful parts of the world are in the future.
Very good. And having been through that process, and it's a question I'll ask to both of you from a slightly different angle, but what digital skills, what skills do you think people really thirst for, really need in order to make a difference? Do you have a sense of the kind of skills that people require?
That's actually an impossible question, because the answer is all sorts of things.
And they keep changing.
A, they're changing, but B, in a successful business, as it goes through its different growth phases, it can need different things. So I'm not going to be prescriptive and say that. I think the really interesting thing for us, though, this is going to sound glib, but I was with a guy today who's just set up an AI company trying to make the legal world effectively automated. And a young Brummie lad who's setting this up, and I just listened to him. And if you said to me what is going to be the single most important thing, it would probably be the ability to apply AI technology.
Yeah, very good. Have you got a sense of the digital skills that perhaps you wish you had before you started, or you think people need today?
Again, as Andy mentioned, it's vast. There's so many different things that you would need skills for. For me personally, technical skills around literally creating content. So if that's videography, if that's editing, using some of those AI tools as well to make processes simpler. But there's also skills around digital marketing, advertising, and those kind of things you can learn there. And actually recently I've worked on a number of projects with some of the more commercial brands such as Google. They have a project called Skills to Go. There's also BT who have a digital marketing skills course. And what's really interesting is that there's actually so many more opportunities now for people to pick up skills and learn what they need to do.
Probably worth, again, I'll tell a little story again to bring it to life. One of the things I've been to, again, today, it's all happened today, was a wonderful organisation here called the Birmingham Ormiston Academy, which is a school, and it's a sixth form school, and it exists specifically for the creative sector. It did not exist 4 years ago. So again, it's a sort of story about growing prowess, and they are literally using a theatre in the city centre for those year 12, years 13s to put on a full Christmas production. And we were seeing all their rehearsals today in the school. So all of those, whether it's the camera work, whether it's the post-production, it's all digitized now, isn't it? So in the very act of in the sense, one of the most traditional art forms, all those digital skills are being applied. And it just, again, made me think this is so, so, so important that we are excellent in this. But it's great that this city's now got a facility like that for bringing our youngsters through.
And Patricia, how did you get your skills? Did you learn on the job? Is it self-taught? How did you get the skills you need?
So all the skills I learned about being a YouTube creator, I learned on YouTube from other YouTube creators. And what's so interesting about this world is that a lot of the information is available, it's free, and it's actually provided for the community. Now, it took me many, many years and actually let's say 4 to 5 years to really get good. But I think now there are shorter ways to learn.
That may answer my second question, because as you said that, there was a community you could learn off each other.
Yes.
And it feels to me if we are going out of our way to create these digital skills independently, or these facilities to allow people to get their digital skills, actually maybe we're better off just going down the route where we get self-taught. Maybe we don't need all this more formal education around digital skills.
I think there's room for both. I think formal training is amazing because it can provide the framework, but there's nothing quite like putting your hands to something and seeing what works, or finding people who've done things, sitting and spending time with them for them to teach you how to do it, and making that learning curve a lot shorter. But there's room for a mix of professional training and qualifications alongside practical experience as well.
Andy, I think just after you became mayor, you set up the West Midlands Leadership Commission to investigate why the diverse makeup of the region's population wasn't necessarily represented in terms of leadership level. How's that progressing?
Well, the commission was great. The recommendations were great. There is some good movement, but not enough. So the honest answer to is it progressing well enough is no. So let me explain what I mean by that. If you look at one or two of the issues that we discussed, so gender diversity in leadership, there is clear evidence that progress is being made. I think now a third of boards in the UK. A third of board membership in the UK are women. So there is clear evidence. If you look at the gender pay gap, it still exists, but it is closing in this region. If you look then at the issues of ethnic diversity and whether different communities are achieving the same outcomes, if you look at the educational progress, we are genuinely making good progress. However, one of the issues that was called out, and if you just look at the young entrepreneurs across this region and the ability for different communities to create startups, again, all the data is really encouraging on some of these underpinning things that will deliver equality in due course. However, if you said to me, have you achieved your aim, which is that the leadership of this region reflects the ethnic composition of this region, the answer is no still, despite a lot of commitments, intent, and I believe that is because it is taking enormous time to move people through career structures.
And when it comes to the creative industries, does it skew more towards greater diversity?
Definitely.
It definitely does.
Definitely.
You know that from experience.
I do, because I know which areas we're doing well in and which areas we're doing badly in. So that is definitely so. And this, again, is quite an encouraging thing. Some of the newer industries for us are more diverse by their very nature. We still see some very traditional areas where we haven't achieved that. So we did the right thing. And any Brummie in the room will shout me down if they think I'm wrong here. I think genuinely this region knows what it wants to achieve in this respect, but there is a frustration that our progress is not fast enough.
Very good. Patricia, from your point of view, do you think creative technologies are helping to break down some of these barriers, or are those barriers persisting nonetheless?
I think definitely as you mentioned, there's a lot of progress, and I think that the opportunities are there for the taking. I just think that not everybody has access and awareness of what's possible. So yes, there are some tools and resources, but if you don't know about that, then how can you get into it? And I think there needs to be maybe a bit more of a systemized way for people to be aware of what true opportunities are there. And maybe that's going into schools or going into underrepresented communities and having voices who come in and say, by the way, this is available to you. And also maybe just, giving people a little bit of a kick up the backside and give them a hand, because some people are busy just dealing with their everyday, especially in diverse communities or people from a poor background. They're thinking about just making ends meet versus let me go and do this fun little course, and someone can actually support them on that.
And when you started out, was your intention to reach underrepresented communities, or was it, I've got something really interesting to say and I want to say it?
My intention was just to create and be visible. And I think for some people, just having that visibility of someone who looks like me is actually an inspiration. It actually gives people the awareness that is actually possible for them. So I think most people, it's really important to make themselves known, make themselves visible on digital platforms and see what happens off the back of it.
An advice question. Andy, I'll start with you. One piece of advice you'd give young entrepreneurs and creators starting out today or emerging right now, what's the one piece of advice as the Mayor of the West Midlands you would give these people?
I can be slightly cheeky, but I often say to people, don't listen to all the advice you get from people as old as me. So don't listen to the advice you're asking me for. Follow your heart. Follow your heart, because if you really believe in something and you're inspired by it, you will succeed. And if you are, shaped by lots of conventional advice, it's likely to curtail you.
Very good. Thank you. Patricia?
Maybe a little similar. It would be ready to break things, be ready to do stuff that might be a little controversial, that might not be the normal way to do stuff, and make mistakes on the journey.
Very good. We'll take 3 questions from Slido. I'll then see if there's some questions people want to ask in person, and then we'll come back to Slido, because this list looks as if it might go on until about midnight tonight. So, but thank you for the questions. This one is from Josh. To both panelists, how can we encourage and create the infrastructure for more software digital startups in Birmingham? And Patricia, maybe you can't talk specifically to Birmingham, but maybe you've got a thought on that anyhow. But Andy, I'll start with you. How can we encourage and create the infrastructure for more software digital startups in Birmingham?
So I'm actually going to be really, really cheeky now. And I might get ruled out of order for this, but it may be interesting to you. That is not the problem in Birmingham. If you look at our startup rate, particularly in digital, it is comparable with many of the best American cities. Our problem is they don't scale up. So our problem is we have so many startups that come and then they die. And our rate of death of businesses is 9% higher than the UK average. So the problem that we've got to solve is not finding the entrepreneurial spirit and all these good ideas from people, but how we actually get them to grow. And if we've done a lot of work on this as to why the growth is curtailed, and it tends to be about the access to cash to grow the business at the critical moment. Why things tend to fail is they're enthusiastic at the beginning and they get to this zombie stage where they sort of run out of growth if they are not captured by the right financing at the moment of that early growth. And the problem in the UK, and when the government talk about levelling up, the single biggest problem of all is nearly all the venture capital finance goes in London. So if you are a startup in London, you are likely to be picked up and get that leg up at just the right moment. The risk here is you will become one of those zombie companies and then die in a few years' time. And so if I could change one thing, it would be the availability of that VC network to pick up those companies at just the right time. And it is, by the way, it's exactly the same if we were having this conversation in Leeds, Manchester, let's say Bristol actually, but any city here, north of here, exactly the same. The over concentration of the financial sector in the UK and London is why we're not doing as well. And that's why things like our universities are stepping forward with a particular investment fund, why we put investment fund, why I try to get all of our clearing banks to put that in place. And I'm sorry if that's not quite the question you asked, but I actually think for the audience, it is actually the problem being called out, because I could wallow, frankly, in the rate of startups here.
Andy, thank you for that. I won't ask you that question, Patricia, because I think it's very specific to Birmingham. I'll ask you this one, which is specific to you. Hi, Patricia. How did you discover / choose your creative niche while starting out? I like that sort of discover / choose, because maybe it was one or the other, maybe it was both. How did you alight on that?
Yeah, so there was definitely a time of exploration and trying a little bit of everything that I was interested in. So just putting my foot in every pie and just, trying it all. And then eventually working out what worked for me, what could I continually create in, as well as where was I going to get the most value for my audiences alongside the brands and the companies that I wanted to work in. So it's about interest, but also commerciality as well.
How has your fast growth and mass appeal changed you as a woman and affected your mental well-being?
It's a great question. They actually say it takes it's actually been 11 years. So my growth actually wasn't that fast. It took me 7 years to get to my first 1 million followers and then another year to get to 2 million. So lucky for me, I had the foundation of, working that career job and doing that slog. I also had a great family around me to keep me grounded. So I didn't necessarily feel like I received fame and acclaim and money over a very short amount of time. And so that's been able to be a pivotal factor for me to kind of keep that mental health balance there. But I will say that, the digital world is a little bit crazy. And I think people can be a bit addicted to Instagram and social media. So working out how to also manage having a real life that is rich alongside an online social media based life
Very good.
As well.
And relatively slow and then incredibly fast. That period that was incredibly fast, was that the toughest for you? Maybe it was incredibly exciting, but was it also stressful and a strain?
I think when you are navigating any kind of growth, it's definitely stressful, especially if you're inexperienced and you don't really not know what to do. I think you just go into fight or flight mode. So I was able to kind of make it happen and work with it. But I do prefer the slower pace versus 1 year of lots and lots of followers and navigating that.
Very good. Thank you for that. Andy, a question for you. How do we bring left behind areas along on the journey in central Birmingham, Newton, Ashton, but also Tipton, West Bromwich, parts of Walsall, etc.?
This is where the skills bit is absolutely critical, because what tends to define some of those places as well as the sort of data that says just the income levels, everything else is really underachieving, is this notion of aspiration and ambition. And I understand why people like that, if their parents have had really difficult economic outturns. But I genuinely believe that if we can work on some of the skills training in some of these critical new sectors, it is that enables people then to have an aspiration to get into these fast growing areas. So the money I said we had about in our skills budget, we work particularly hard to make sure it is deliberately focused on some of the more challenged areas. And indeed, and I will call this out directly, and some people will criticize me for this, but it is a fact that about 60% of it goes on BME communities. So we are actively tilting the budgets that we have towards the communities that tend to have least opportunities, because that is, I think, the most effective way of lifting those aspirations and then improving outcomes.
And is there evidence that this is a strategy that is working?
There is very clear evidence that that can be taken two ways. There is very clear evidence that it is a strategy that is working in terms of lifting the outcomes, in terms of qualification levels in those areas. There's not yet the evidence that that has changed the economic fundamentals in some of those areas. But in a sense, there is one other thing, and I hope people will permit me to say this, that areas are not static. So the data for an area can continue to look really disappointing, but actually the people living there move through to some extent. That's definitely the case with some of the areas in near the centre of Birmingham. So outcomes for people from those communities move forward, even if the data for the current residents of a suburb does not move forward. And that is actually a very positive thing about how this city has worked for at least 100 years.
Very good. Questions from the floor. So we'll take that.
I am the co-founder of Black Business Magazine, and I also work with creative entrepreneurs to get visible, build their brand so they can monetize their brand. My question is for Patricia. I often work with people where they have talent in abundance, but they're not quite sure how to monetize it and build business around it. What are the 3 top things that you will say to any creative out there who wants to build a business around their talents and creativity?
I think my just one thing right now I'd say is fail fast and don't be afraid to try new things and see what sticks. I know that's not the most inspiring, but it's something I live by, and I think it's helped me along my journey. And actually, I think it ties in slightly to my advice for the talent who want to work out commerciality, is that sometimes it's hard to know what is exactly going to stick. So you have to try a number of different things and be willing to fail before you kind of end up on the thing that might be successful. And I think you also have to work out, though there is talent and there's skills and there's things, and some might just be hobbies and things that you get intrinsic value out of, but they may never be commercial, and that's okay as well. You don't have to commercialize everything you're interested in, and then finding things that you can see from a market perspective may be growing and have commercial opportunity, and you have skills that align there as well. So that was what my kind of points would be.
So hi, my name is Belinda Core. I work in both marketing and mentoring. So by day I do a lot of stuff to do with mentoring, and obviously hearing from you guys has been absolutely amazing. So I have 2 questions. One is, have you ever had a mentor during your journey? And the second one is, it's amazing having all of us here, but what are we doing to ensure that young people are aware of what needs to be done within the digital growth in Birmingham?
So I've never had actually, do you know what? I have had formal mentors, but not in the beginning of my journey. And what I love about the world of online is that there are mentors everywhere. We have access to mentors via books. via podcasts, via multiple digital platforms where they're sharing their learnings and their experiences, not directly to me, but every time I listen to them, I pick something up that I can apply to my life. And so I'm so lucky to have these digital mentors who may not have known that actually I was looking up to them and I was using their resources and the information that they shared with me to power my journey. Eventually, it was great to have one-on-one mentors. So people who, they weren't necessarily formally mentors, but I could see that they were doing great in business. I could reach out to them in a DM. Some of them would follow up with me, have a little conversation over coffee, and I would take insights and ask questions, and that would be valuable for me.
And
so,
are you a mentor to others now?
I feel like I am via the content that I create. So we have the Break platform where I've provided a lot of information about literary accounting and budgeting and random stuff. And 25,000 people downloaded my budget tracker. So I know, and I've had stories of people like, I've literally transformed my financial situation from that. So ideally, I've been able to do that. And that's what the world of digital is about. You have access to the entire world and great people doing great things.
And that second question, which is, I guess is related to the first question, but that second question, how do we reach beyond this room to the young people of Birmingham and beyond? How do we reach those people?
I mean, as an online girl, I'm going to say, well, there could be opportunities online, but I feel like Andy has probably a more practical solution that could be super valuable.
I actually think you're much nearer to it than I am, actually.
Really?
So, yeah.
I mean, I think online, it's the answer. They're all online. They're there. Make something really cool. Make something really fun that they connect with. Use young people to create the content.
Obviously, it's been great in recent years with BBC, Channel 4, HSBC investing in the Midlands. A big reason for that was obviously HS2. I think getting those brands out of London and investing here.
You're right. We've had a brilliant run at inward investment. And the stats say the West Midlands is performing better than anywhere else in the country on this at the moment. And actually, we always write in the first line of our sort of proposals when we go around the world, brilliant connectivity. But actually, that's not what's done the job. What's done the job has been two completely different things, which are much more relevant to the conversation we've been having. First of all, the ideas coming out of our universities. And secondly, have we got the talented people to make the most of those ideas? And I promise you, almost every board around the world or in Britain that's relocated here that has made a decision, it's been on those two. We might like to have told people it was HS2, but it's been, those are our real USPs. What's coming out of the universities, particularly in some of the new sectors, and I include creativity in that. And have we got the people that can really make their ideas into a reality?
Andy, I've got a question for you, and actually it's a YouTube question, but I guess it applies to other channels as well. What can you do to support new YouTubers in the Midlands? What can you do to help and support those people creating content in the Midlands? Is it your role to do anything? Maybe it's not.
Well, this is a very literal answer to the question, but I think it's absolutely dead relevant to what we're being asked. Connectivity. I was asked earlier on, what can the public sector do? So 5 years ago now, there was a big competition that the government ran as to which part of the country would be the 5G testbed. We won. It was one I said we had to win. It was another must win because digital industry, the connectivity is the bedrock of it. And this is now the best connected place in Britain. And so if you are, whether it be YouTube or whether you're an architect downloading your images or whether you're a sports broadcaster or anything, the whole question of the connectivity will be better here. So that I can look you in the eye and say that is something we have driven. And that had to be important for people wanting, bluntly put, to use the net in that way.
Another question goes back to diversity, inclusion. It goes back to representation. Only 0.3% of VC capital, venture capital, goes to black founders.
This is right.
How do you suggest underrepresented groups go about acquiring funding despite the discrimination? How do we nudge that 0.3% up to something respectable?
Well, as you can tell from what I said earlier, I'm not going to have a brilliant answer to this because this even before we come to the diversity question, we're actually failing in the more general point about VC funding. But we were talking about this, we've been talking about this a lot recently. And I think the answer is there is a role for, again, this enabling from the public sector. There is a role for us to select and then showcase and put forward the best of our startups, potential scale-ups. And I am very confident if we did that from the West Midlands, the proportion that would be black-led would probably be much nearer half the 0.3%. So I think, I don't mind in front of all these witnesses, that is what I expect we will have to do, because I've sort of given up on the notion that 110 miles on the train shouldn't stop people. So we need to be active in promoting that, actually. And there are some wonderful organisations here, and Drew will know of them very well, that literally are there to support Black-founded businesses per se. And again, I think we can in turn actively support those networks. So they do exist, but our role with the VCs, I think, has to be to select and promote and take them.
Patricia, any observations from your own personal experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a problem I've identified. And I think it's about finding, again, these organizations who are supporting these grassroots companies to have a leg up. And maybe it's, again, private companies supporting those companies and giving them funding first, that then puts them in the position to be seen by people in the right rooms. And I think there's just this lack of visibility and also understanding of how this whole process works. I didn't even know what VC funding was. And I was running a business and I'm bootstrapping. And I didn't realize I've bootstrapped my whole way through everything I've done. And then other people, it's like, oh, they gave me £1 million to start this thing. And I'm like, they just give people money away. So people like me weren't necessarily aware of this. So how do you bring that awareness to these communities who aren't necessarily from a background where they know that this is possible?
And just help me out with bootstrapping, because I've heard that expression loads and loads of times, and I'm too embarrassed to ask what it means, but now I'm not. Tell me what it means.
So bootstrapping is where you decide to fund your own business idea yourself. So in the world of VC and investment, it's like, oh, I can get some money or I might bootstrap it. And people always are like, well, I'll decide if I'll get one option or the other. But most people don't have access to that VC. We're all bootstrapping because that's our only choice. But actually realizing now there's a lot of free money available and they're throwing it at people who don't necessarily look like me, who are not, no diss, but their ideas aren't as great as my ideas or ideas of other people that I've seen, and they get money and they lose 8 million and they're like, well, on to the next, because there's almost that sense of entitlement that other groups are not aware of. So bringing that awareness is going to be super important.
We've been very good and only responded when you've asked us a question. So if I can break the habit of the evening, we've gone straight to VC, and I know I took the discussion there, and everything's been said about that is right. But there are a hell of a lot of other financial answers here. And actually, I'm not going to be able to do the data off the top of my head. But if you look at the efforts of our clearing banks at the moment to be much more equal in terms of how they use their funding, there's much more positivity there. And for most businesses, that is still, about 90% of businesses, that's still where they get their basic funding from. So that, and then if you think there are other organizations like community development trusts, which again, much more in some of the communities where there's the most concentration of ethnic minority-led businesses. So there are other answers to the very problem that you are identifying.
Very good. Patricia, just a final question from me to you. People out there listening to you, inspired by your story, they fancy a little bit of what you do. What's the first thing they should do when they get home tonight or when they wake up tomorrow morning?
Pick up a camera, pick up your iPhone or your Google phone or whatever you have, and speak to yourself, speak to an audience, and put it out on a platform. I think everyone has something of value intrinsically that they can probably share with the world, and think about what information or knowledge or something that you would have wanted to deliver or hear, and put it out there.
Thank you all very much for your questions. Please put your hands together to our speakers.